I must rise above the flames.
Welcome back, Flick Knaves. I'm Lupinefiasco, this is Daily FaB Gameplay, and today we are playing Cindra, Dracai of Retribution. For anyone who is new to the channel, welcome to the Empire. What we do here is review replays of games I played on the Talishar.net client days or weeks ago, after enough time has passed that I lose my bias and can more objectively judge the quality of my games. I will talk through turn cycles as if I were taking them now, giving my thought process for the lines I would take, and comparing those to the lines I did take at the time of recording. We either learn from my mistakes or reinforce good play patterns with the overall goal of tightening and optimizing our gameplay in the future to take down paper events and walk away with that shiny, shiny cardboard. If you like what you see and would like to try this deck for yourself on Talishar, there is a FaB deck link in the video description below. While you're down there, if you haven't already done so, please consider subscribing to my YouTube channel. It is the best free way to support me and to make sure that you see every new episode of Daily FaB Gameplay in your YouTube feed. I also have a Blue Sky, a Discord, and a Patreon, links to which are in the video description. Patrons at the Arc Lightning tier or higher will get access to all of my matchup guides for all of my deck lists forever, including this one. Now, without further ado, let's jump right into the gameplay. Hey, if you're watching this, thank you for doing so. I know everyone usually hates mirror matches, and honestly, the Cindra mirror is pretty bad, at least when you're in the unfortunate position of having to go first, just as we are here. You just start behind because it's any aggro mirror. You start behind when you go first, but that is compounded in the Cindra mirror where you just cannot block as effectively going second, going first because you need to deal with whatever your opponent is doing, and if you are blocking to prevent their on-hits, you are losing the cards you need to produce your on-hits. So, things to remember in the Cindra mirror: for one thing, win the die roll, and when you do, choose to go second. For another, I am using Yuki Lee Bender's sideboard guide available through her Patreon. That link is in the video description. I don't believe her list has us boarding in any defense reactions, and I think when you're going first, you should be boarding them in. That if you can cut some 2 blocks and put in 4 blocks, that might help you get back into this game. Really going first, there are 2 options. The first is to outplay your opponent, which is very difficult to do with 2 competent Cindra pilots. The other is to draw better than your opponent, and so if you are able to extract more value from hands because some of your cards block for 4, then that might help you to catch up. Other than that, there are a few sequencing mistakes in this game, so we're going to take a look through and talk about things that I could have done. I think this game was winnable from a position of weakness, and we're going to just explore that and see what I could have done. So this opening hand is terrible. When you are going first as Cindra, there is some merit to sending attacks. Usually you don't want to let your opponent filter, but at the same time, we have our Flick Knives, we have some breakpoints in the deck, so there is a good chance that you can push damage on turn 0, and if you are putting enough Draconic Links on the chain, you'll even be able to buy back your daggers. This hand doesn't really do that, because we have 3 attacks that don't have go again, and one of them costs 1. So as far as what is the most aggressive line we could take, it's probably pitch Art of Dragon Blood to dagger, pitch Art of Dragon Fire to dagger, Fire Tenet, Lava Burst, Flick Knives, buy back a dagger, but we don't get an arsenal. And as much as I do not want to arsenal in the Cindra mirror out of abundant respect for Breaking Point, if we do have the misfortune of going first, at least we can put ourselves into a position where we're maybe a little bit better on our next turn. So the most effective line of dagger, dagger, Fire Tenet, Lava Burst just isn't very good, and I don't want to take that line. So what I would like to do here instead is just activate Cindra, pitch Lava Burst, Art of Dragon Fire, Art of Dragon Blood to cycle them out of my hand, arsenal Fire Tenet, and draw 4 new cards. We aren't pushing any damage, but we also aren't going down daggers. We aren't letting our opponent filter, and most importantly, we aren't just spinning our wheels for no good reason. That is not what I'm going to do. I am going to attempt to push some damage on turn 1, which I disagree with, and I especially disagree with this line. So opening with the dagger is better for just trying to push some damage, because it disincentivizes my opponent from blocking. They're not going to block a dagger for 1 when they can save cards in hand to block more damage down the road. But if we dagger for 2, suddenly blocking with a 2 block looks really good. So this was a terrible decision. The other terrible decision that we can make is what we are putting into Arsenal. And you would think, yeah, Lava Burst is a good one to put into Arsenal because it's a finisher. But we don't really need finishers in this deck. We have plenty of cards that act as finishers. What we need are things that start a turn. And so we have Ravenous Rabble into Blaze Headlong, but what is unfortunate about that sequencing is it says that our hit trigger for Mask Momentum is going to come in the form of Hot on Their Heels. We don't have a good opener right now. If we did, we could play the opener, then Hot on Their Heels, then Blaze Headlong, and that'd be great. If we wanted to take that line, we're pitching Ravenous Rabble to dagger, then Hot on Their Heels, Blaze Headlong, and while that does put us in a better position to trigger Mask Momentum, it's just 3 fewer points of damage, and that is not a trade I'm willing to make. So if we had a Fire Tenant in our arsenal, then what we get to do with this hand is Fire Tenant for 3 go again, Ravenous Rabble for 4 go again, Blaze Headlong for 5 go again. Now we have some really threatening breakpoints for Mask Momentum, and depending on how many cards our opponent gives us to block out the Blaze Headlong or the Ravenous Rabble, that's where we have Flick Knives to keep the chain going. We don't rely on Hot on Their Heels to be the hit trigger. We can rely on Blaze Headlong, which would just be much better. So as far as dealing with what Cindra's doing, she has 4 cards in hand. We're not going to block the Ronin Renegade. If we do want to adequately block whatever Cindra is going to threaten Mask Momentum with on 4 cards, we are best off blocking links 2 and 3. This Dracai of Retribution coming in as, I suppose, a link on the chain is an easy block for Dragonscaler Flight Path. Cindra cannot Flick Knives here because she would lose her other dagger that would let her continue to push this chain. So if she only has these 2 cards in hand, then we can just block one of them and we're done with blocking for the turn. The fact that Cindra is attacking with another dagger tells me 2 things. The first is that her hand sucks, which we can see that it does. Having Art of Dragon Blood and Dragon Power as 2 finishers is really bad. The other thing is that she really needs a resource from the Blood Splattered Vest. And so if she needs a resource, she still has Flick Knives available. We're not going to block this dagger. We can just save cards to block whatever the follow-up is. We've got the Flick Knives, put a counter on the Blood Splattered Vest to make a resource. I am assuming that this is Breaking Point, and that is why we don't want to ever Arsenal in the Cindra mirror. And it's unfortunate, it is another downside of going first, that really your only benefit from going first is being able to Arsenal a card, and when your opponent has the turn 1 Breaking Point, you're just out of luck. We also, anecdotally, there is no way to know for sure that this could have happened. Our Cindra's opening hand could have easily been reversed with what she has here, but had we just passed the turn on turn 0, Cindra would not have Breaking Point. So the fact that she drew up into it is why you don't let your opponents filter on turn 0. So now we have to deal with this Breaking Point. Again, if we have Fire Tenant in Arsenal, this is an easy 2-card block with Hunt the Hunter and Hot on Their Heels. Then our turn is Fire Tenant, Rabble, Blaze Headlong. We are pushing 12 points of damage, and we're threatening very efficient Mask of Momentum triggers. Instead, we have a very difficult decision to make. We cannot cover Breaking Point without giving multiple cards, and if we use Hot on Their Heels and Hunt the Hunter, we don't trigger the Rupture on Lava Burst, which means our turn is Ravenous Rabble, Blaze Headlong, pass, or Ravenous Rabble, Blaze Headlong, Lava Burst for 2, see if our Cindra wants to give us a card from hand to block it, and that might honestly be good enough. Cindra cannot cover it with armor. If she gives us a card from hand, then we know that we only need to block the third chain link to keep her off of drawing. Honestly, that is what I would do now. I would block 6 here with Hollow on their heels and Hunt the Hunter, and then send Ravenous Rabble Blaze Headlong. Depending on how my opponent deals with the Blaze Headlong, I might just pass the turn, or I might play Lava Burst. If we do play Lava Burst, or rather, if our opponent blocks the Blaze Headlong, we can Flick Knives to keep our momentum chain going, put a resource on Blood Splattered Vest, then play Lava Burst. We have 2 Draconic chain links on the combat chain, and we use our floating resource to buy back both of our daggers, and honestly, not a bad trade. What I'm choosing to do instead is take 5 here and lose my arsenal, and while that is fine, it is a higher value line because we would have gotten a 5-card 16 out of those 5 cards. We block for 6, and then we send 10 damage on our turn. What we are getting instead is a 4-card 4, 8, 11, 12, 17 with the cards we have in hand, and if we draw off of that, we effectively get a 4-card 20. So it's more value, but it just puts us into a position where Cindra can stop this, and we've taken more damage than we really wanted to. We need to be playing much more tightly going first because we started at a disadvantage, and if we're letting Cindra just get 8 points of value from her breaking point, that isn't how we get ahead. So I think while that line is somewhat defensible, because we get a 4-card 20 compared to a 5-card 16, at the same time, we took a lot of damage, and more importantly, all of that could have been avoided if we just Arsenal Fire Tenet instead of Lava Burst. Like I said, Cindra is not hurting for finishers. Cindra is hurting for starters and for ways to sequence more effectively. And we gave both of those up by arsenaling Lava Burst instead of Fire Tenet. So we've got Hot on their heels. Cindra did not block the Blaze Headlong. I'm really hoping she blocks the Hot on their heels because we can Flick Knives Blood Splattered Vest. We are not going to Flick Knives here because we don't need to. We're going to draw for Mask of Momentum, and we can wait until our Cindra maybe shows us Loyalty Beyond the Grave or Shelter from the Storm. We draw into the display Loyalty that we knew was on top of our deck. We just play it out immediately. Here we Flick Knives, use our Vest. And the reason for this is I don't want to Arsenal because I don't want to leave myself open to Breaking Point, and instead I get to just play out my entire hand, get us 11 points ahead of our opposing Cindra. So a really good turn for us, right? This was a ton of damage, put us into a commanding life lead. Now the downside is our Cindra has 4 cards. She very likely gets to trigger Mask of Momentum. But we can take a look at what we have in hand now, and it's looking pretty good. We can pitch Brand with Cinderclaw to attack with both Kunai. Whichever one of them hits, we will use Blood Splattered Vest to make a resource. After the 2 Kunai, we play Hot on their heels. That threatens Mask of Momentum if our opponent blocks it. For 3, we have Ancestral Empowerment to get over the top. We draw a card from Ancestral, draw a card from Mask of Momentum, have our floating resource to play Breaking Point. We even have our Flight Path if we want to get the Breaking Point go again for something like a Lava Burst. So our turn is pretty good. We are incentivized to not block here, and that's good because Cindra has 4 cards, and it would be difficult for us to stop her from drawing. We can hold on to the Breaking Point in case Cindra arsenals something. This turn gets a lot worse if Cindra correctly does not arsenal. At that point, if Cindra plays the last card in her hand, maybe we just think about blocking with Breaking Point for 3 points of value, assuming that we are going to draw another finisher type card off the top of our deck. It's an interesting decision. We don't need to come up to it now. We can just wait and see what Cindra does. We're pretty locked in to letting her trigger Mask of Momentum, so we really just don't need to worry about blocks here. For one thing, it would be difficult for us to stop all this damage, and for another, our hand is much better on offense than on defense, so we will just take a bunch of damage and see what Cindra does. If the Rising Resentment hits, then Cindra can banish a 1-cost attack from hand. At the same time, She has not used Flick Knives yet, so if she does have a 1 cost and we block the Rising Resentment, she can still play it. The only 3 block in my hand that I would want to block with is Breaking Point. So if we block the Rising Resentment with Breaking Point and Cindra arsenals this last card, that sort of sucks for us because we would have wanted the Breaking Point for that. What I'm more hopeful for is that Cindra just doesn't want to use this last card in her hand, and just arsenals it and gives us that Breaking Point value. But if all of your Cindra opponents are correctly not arsenaling, just as you are not arsenaling, then Breaking Point goes down in value. It's a really weird card in Cindra because it is simultaneously the best and most useless card in our deck, depending on how your opposing Cindra is able to convert her hands. We've got Demonstrate Devotion coming in for 4 with Go Again. We aren't expecting another attack after this, but Cindra has not Flicked Knives yet, so this really represents 5 points of damage, which would put us down to 11. Do we respect it and just block for 3, or do we hold the Breaking Point? So right now, if we lose Breaking Point, our hand does 1, 2, 5, 6 points of damage with 2 random cards off the top of our deck. And we would go to 14. If we do not block the Demonstrate Devotion, then our hand does 11 points of damage with 2 random cards off the top, and we go to 11. So it's really tough. Neither one of those is threatening lethal, and we would have to get very lucky with our 2 draws in order to get something that threatens lethal. But I do think it's better to block with the Breaking Point. We are going to trigger Mask of Momentum unless our opponent goes very, very defensive on us, which would be great because if they're blocking excessively, it means they are not attacking. If we can stay at 14, as good and as consistent as Cindra usually is, she absolutely can draw 4-card hands that don't do 14 points of damage. We also have our Mask of Momentum and our Blood Splattered Vest to block with if we need them. So I would like to be playing mid-range here. I think we are behind enough that the Breaking Point isn't good on offense, it's better on defense. Now, if it was something like Art of Dragon Fire, then hell yeah, I'm keeping it, because that's 7 on offense, and we can actually use our fealties. But for now, it is just a 1 for 5 with no text. I would have preferred to get 3 points of value out of it, and rely on the top 2 cards of my deck being something that I can use instead. We do want to add a stain counter to the Blood Splattered Vest. We are not going to withhold information by relying on the Flicked Kunai to hit. Don't be a Brody Spurlock. Don't wait until the very last minute to use your trick and then get blown out by damage prevention. You know what your turn is going to look like. You are not overly broadcasting your intentions by getting your resource as soon as you can, and it just puts you into a position where a discard Shelter from the Storm, or Calling Breeze, or Haunting Rendition, or whatever source of damage prevention your opponent has, does not completely ruin your turn. So we've got Hot on Their Heels coming in for 3 with Go Again. We are going to play Ancestral Empowerment on this, even though it opens us up to getting blown out by a Shelter from the Storm, Sink Below, or Wax On. We cannot use Ancestral Empowerment on Breaking Point. So we would rather just get the value from Ancestral by drawing anything off the top of our deck so that we know what the rest of our turn looks like, than just hold on to it. So we'll play it. Our opponent does not go for the block. We draw the absolute worst card we could off the top of our deck in another Breaking Point, and now we see, holy shit, if we were at 14 here, we would be playing the same turn cycle, but with 3 more life to play with, and that's where I think not blocking with Breaking Point last turn was just a huge mistake, because what we do now is play Ronin Renegade, then play Breaking Point, and arsenal the second Breaking Point. We cannot cheat out these 2 Breaking Points because we don't have a resource to do it, and we have no way of getting one. But that means that this Breaking Point honestly is going to rot. Our opponent is keeping 4 cards, we're at 11, we are going to have to start blocking, and if we're blocking, it means that we are not generating the chain links so that Breaking Point is online, And God forbid we have to block with Blood Splattered Vest so that we can't even make the resource to play Breaking Point. And even worse than that, let's say we draw another 1 cost from our deck, like Art of the Dragon Fire. We cannot play both of them, so one of these 2 cards is going to rot, unless we block with Art of Dragon Fire, which I am very much in favor of doing. Opponent opens up with a kunai. We're not going to block this. We cannot block it and prevent the Mask of Momentum trigger, especially because our opponent has Flick Knives, so we will just take 1 here. Let them get their stain counter if they want it, which they do, so we know that another 1 cost attack is coming in. If it's Breaking Point, that's honestly not the worst thing in the world for us, because we don't want our arsenal. If it's Art of Dragon Fire, that is a little worse. I want to start aggressively blocking. My opponent is at an effective 9 life, 5 life total, and then 4 armor. If I lose my Art of Dragon Fire, my hand still does 11 and 12 if I get to keep Flick Knives. And if we can even do 12 damage without Flick Knives by playing Brand with Cinderclaw, Blaze Headlong, pitch Blaze Headlong to play Breaking Point. And that means that my opponent, if I can threaten 12 damage this turn, my opponent needs to give me 2 cards from hand. She cannot give me all of her armor and 1 card. It's all of her armor and 2 cards. And Cindra's 2-card hands without Flick Knives are kind of bad. So if we block the Mask of Momentum and the Blood Splattered Vest here, Cindra uses Flick Knives, we go to 9, and now we have Art of the Dragon Fire and Flick Knives to block whatever the follow-up is. So this is where I want to cash in my armor. This is where I want to say Cindra really needs to work hard for her Mask of Momentum trigger. And if she screws it up, then I can live, and I can threaten lethal, and I can make Cindra need to work to stay alive. So had we blocked there, we would be blocking this Ravenous Rabble with Flick Knives and Art of Dragon Fire. Because we didn't block there, suddenly covering 4 points of damage is very difficult, and where I might want to do it even is block with all of my armor. Lose the Flick Knives, lose the Vest, lose the Mask of Momentum, but get to keep a 4-card hand. And if Cindra's follow-up here is literally anything that isn't Art of Dragon Fire, it means that we get to send 3, 7, 11, 16 damage. And if we're sending 16 damage, suddenly Cindra needs to give us all of her armor and 3 cards from hand. And if she gives us 3 cards from hand to stay alive, there's a pretty good chance that we don't die from that. We can block whatever the 1 attack is, and then kill her with 3 cards. So I hate this block. This is the time to cash in armor, and it sucks that we have to do it, but this is really when we need to kill our darlings and just keep damage. Because the Blaze Headlong that we just blocked with is much, much better than the Blood Splattered Vest and Flick Knives that we still have. Now, that being said, I would like to go to 2 here. If I could block this with Art of Dragon Fire, go to 2, and then my hand does 12, 13 even. Again, we are putting Cindra into a position where she needs to block. She has 2 cards, she has Flick Knives, she'll have a dagger, so we're still probably dead if we're at 2 because we have to respect literally everything. But this isn't how we win. This is how we send a 2-card 9, which is good, but Cindra can give us 1 card from hand and armor and live, and that doesn't win games. So this will be our last turn. The game is going to end after this. Cindra can give us a 3 block from hand to cover this damage, and then even just Mask of Momentum to cover up the Breaking Point and live, and then keep 3 cards, Flick Knives, Blood Splattered Vest. We really can't afford to take damage, so the game has ended. And I'm going to talk through Cindra determining what the best blocks are. I respect thinking through this part of the game, where this is where one would stumble before the finish line, but honestly, the game has ended. So why did we lose this game? Some pretty poor decision making on turn 0 for one thing. That is absolutely a situation where we can cut our losses from a terrible hand and say, you know what, I'm not going to push any damage on turn 0, but you are not going to get any value from my turn 0 either. We did not properly use our finishers. 2 turns ago, we should have blocked with a breaking point that would have let us play this breaking point a turn earlier. We would have been at 3 more life, which means that maybe we don't need to give equipment there, or we can keep cards in hand. If we can at least keep that breaking point, then Cindra performs this block with equipment and then has to give us cards from hand, and maybe we are in a better situation. There was definitely some luck involved. Our Cindra just drew the nuts both times. Breaking Point on turn 1 was insane. Art of Dragon Fire on turn 3 was insane, and if you swap those two, if she draws the Art of Dragon Fire on turn 1, way better for us. If she draws the Breaking Point on turn 3, way better for us. We presented 16 damage, 16 value per turn. Our opposing Cindra did more than that because her hands were just really good. But even so, I think we could have navigated our way through this, and I just made consecutively bad decisions in such a way that going second we're fine because we have the advantage. We can afford to give up value like that. But going first, you need to play so much tighter because you are starting the game behind. It's also where I think defense reactions come in really handy, where if we ever get to 1-card block a Ravenous Rabble for 4, we're way ahead on value. Cindra without defense reactions just can't do that. It's very hard for her to get 4 value per card without using an action point outside of Ravenous Rabble. She has Art of Dragon Fire, Art of Dragon Blood, but it doesn't have Magical Go again, takes some doing. So, winnable game. The Cindra mirror is winnable going first. It's very difficult, not easy to do, not fun. Why I'm not playing Cindra for RTN season because I don't want to deal with the mirror. But there are ways to win it, and it usually comes from making sure you are extracting as much value from your hand and your deck as you possibly can, and really just relying on your deck to serve up answers, because if your deck is not giving you the good draws, you just lose. So I hope you enjoyed this game. I hope you learned something. If so, be sure to head jab that like button. My comments are always open for any questions or feedback. If you have not already done so, please consider a YouTube subscription. It's free and helps me out a lot. I have a Discord, a Blue Sky, and a Patreon, links to which are in the video description below. I will be back with more daily FaB gameplay, and until the next time I see you, take care.